All right, so welcome everyone. We're excited to have our chat today with Illia Polosukhin. Is that pronounced correctly, Illia?
Yeah, that's correct.
Awesome. Founder of Near Protocol. A bit of context. I'm Gil Rosen, president of the Stanford Blockchain Accelerator, and this is part of our series for our accelerator teams on kind of giving them insight from industry thought leaders on kind of building and launching in the blockchain space. For those that don't know, the Stanford Blockchain Accelerator is part of the Stanford Blockchain Club. We incubate teams from Stanford student and alumni building in the blockchain space broadly to help drive blockchain adoption. It's everything from infrastructure to DeFi to real world applications, kind of a mix of different projects. And the teams have done really well. We've had close to 50 teams now go through the accelerator. Almost all of them raised from all the top funds, Andreessen, Sequoia, Bain Capital, Dragonfly, etc. And like 60-70% of them launch and are post revenue within 6 months. So we have a big emphasis on how do we support founders to build something real that will be usable, that's supporting the broader ecosystem and either enabling new use cases or driving net interest into the space. I'm Gil. I run the accelerator together with Stephen and Kuhn. And today we have Illia Polosukhin. So I could give a big intro, but actually I think it's better to just hear from you kind of a little bit about your journey into blockchain. Would love to hear kind of how you first encountered blockchain and what made you want to pivot your career into this space.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me here. Great to join this, and hopefully it will be informative for everyone. Yeah, so my background is in machine learning and AI. I was working for about 10 years before the blockchain. And I would say it was a journey of necessity for the most part. So kind of as a part of the background, I worked at Google Research previously to Near, and among other things, I worked on what became Transformers, which is now powering all of the AI advancements kind of in recent years. And at the same time, I mean, Google is a great place kind of for, I would say, settled life and maybe doing some research, but it's not the place to experiment and try new products. And so kind of I wanted to leave and start a startup to actually use some of these technologies around, I mean, what was Transformers just coming out, specifically for teaching machines to code. So similarly to, GitHub Copilot and some other similar things. Now, this was 2017. We didn't have $300 million worth of compute to do that. And so we were trying to be smarter. So we did a lot of data labeling with actually students around the world who were writing programs from descriptions, writing descriptions for programs, like doing other small tasks, writing tests and stuff like this. And so we faced a challenge where we actually needed to pay these people, right? This is people from China, from kind of Eastern Europe, and from like other countries where they don't have bank accounts. There's some restrictions on kind of money flow in dollars. And so we started looking at the blockchain space more as like, hey, there's a global payment network that everybody advertises. Can we use it to just solve our own challenge? And like literally it started as like, can we just solve the thing we're doing? And the answer was no, because Bitcoin and Ethereum, even at that time, were expensive. Like, it was like 10-15 cents per transaction, which was more than we were paying for kind of individual task. And then the interfaces kind of and the way you build this was all kind of awkward, complicated, hard to onboard people, hard to explain what's going on. And so we started kind of figuring out and researching more about the space. And I would say, like, in parallel, worth mentioning that, like, from my perspective, the proof of work methodology is, I would say, the opposite of how our world works, right? Our world is in general, the more work we're doing, we're trying to maintain the amount of energy required, right? Like we're always trying to optimize, and Bitcoin is the opposite, right? It's like you actually doing the same amount of work, the same amount of useful, work, but you're spending a lot more energy as you becoming more successful. And so when I learned about proof of stake, I got really excited about that idea, kind of even before this position, because it seemed like it aligned more kind of the need for economic security and the economics of this. And so when we started exploring, we kind of started from this idea of proof of stake and started figuring out how to link all those things together. And then the other thing, coming from Google, and my co-founder is coming from Single Store, which is a sharded database company. The first thing we come up with is, this thing needs to scale, so it needs to be parallel processing. And the way, everybody does this is by sharding, meaning you hide the complexity from the users and developers, and you shard the underlying database in such a way that allows you to parallel process. And so that's kind of where we started. How do we make something that's simple to use and simple to build on, secure, and is truly scalable, build on proof of stake. And yeah, that gave kind of journey to Near in August 2018. It's been wild years.
Yes, it certainly has been, especially August 2018. So I guess to that point, kind of, you entered this looking for an approach to payments to solve kind of your AI platform problem. You decided to pivot into this space completely to really rebuild this concept of a global computer / the internet of the future. What gave you the confidence that the market was there? I mean, was it because this was in 2018, and if you were to do it now, you'd think differently? Or like, I guess, like, which market use cases were you specifically trying to solve? Was it payments overall when you were first going into this, or were you thinking kind of that big vision of like a new internet paradigm? And what gave you the confidence that the market would actually be there and you'd be able to get kind of enough users and people to really bootstrap the ecosystem overall?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the initial confidence came from our own point that we wanted this, right? Like we would have used a network that was kind of scalable and easy to use and for our own use case. And so, kind of talking with people at that point in San Francisco, it felt like other people are kind of aligned with that idea. At the same time, I think the bigger vision definitely did not escape us, and I would say it took us some time to fully develop it, and kind of this idea of open web that we really talk about now. But that conceptually, the kind of this big corporations that really become the walled gardens for data and kind of turn their users into pretty much product, right? Has always been something that like needs to be addressed, right? And I think, like, from my perspective, there is a kind of two possible worlds we can live in. And I don't think there's much in between state. Either it's very few corporations that control every step of our day and life, and they're not doing this because they're evil per se. They're doing it because they're maximizing profit, and the way to maximize profit is literally control every human at every moment of time. And especially now with generative AI, you can do this even more. Like, your TikTok doesn't need to be any more creators. It will be fully generated for you, such that you spend all of your time on TikTok and never leave, right? Or we live in an open world where people are in control, are own their own data and assets, are able to decide what they want. The platforms are open. Anybody can build on them. Anybody can I can port my data to any application I want, right? And I don't think there's much between state. Like, I mean, we kind of right now exist in this between state, but those two, they call attractors in system design, right? Like, they are the final state that you cannot get out of. And so I really hope, to make a difference, to switch us to this open web state, away from kind of consolidation of power. And again, like, I don't think it's like inherently evil. It's just the economic reality of technology is that there's zero marginal costs. And so the businesses will and continue, gaining power with no cost to them to become like a monopoly across a full stack of your activities.
Yeah, and I think we have a bunch of these kind of monopolies that we see that are heavily vertically integrated. There is an argument that vertical integration is necessary to some degree to control user experience and to make sure that that's improved. I think like Apple is a great example, potentially Tesla, versus kind of your Android ecosystem, which tends to be a lot more fragmented. But actually, I want to get into that a little bit later in terms of vertical integration. Before we get into that, this is a huge vision. The joke is, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? How did you think about kind of what stages you would need to build in and what you would need to build first and when? And I think like what's of great use to our founders right now that are in the Accelerator is, how did you think about what milestones you would need and what team members you would need and what capital you would need at like your different stages of fundraising? So your pre-seed, like what were you going to have to build and prove for pre-seed, for seed, for Series A, and how much capital were you thinking you would need for that?
Yeah, so I will caveat it, layer ones are very different from everything else. And so the type of things you do for layer one is definitely not as applicable for other applications. But at the same time, there's some similar patterns. And so for us, the first goal was to get to what we call DevNet. So DevNet was, it will look like it's a final blockchain, except there will be no blockchain. And so kind of we faked, it was just like one server pretty much that ran all smart contracts and had all the APIs. Right. And so we were rushing toward that first, while in parallel, we were researching how to do the blockchain piece, right? And so actually like December 2018, we had first DevNet and we had internal hackathon for our team to build on top of it. We had first applications we started in August. In December, we had first applications built on our own network, right? And that probably is the main lesson, just like get to something that your users/developers can build on top as soon as possible, even if you kind of like faked or hacked together the actual underlying value prop that you will, can like get to a bit later. Now, in our case, we also end up researching multiple consensuses, multiple blockchain kind of sharding methodologies. We end up starting this whiteboard series where we interviewed other blockchains and how they're structured and how they built. And so that gave us like a very good understanding. Like we implemented 5 different consensuses at the end before we got to ours. And so we had like very good understanding, just like from the learning and really like low level, understanding. And so this is where to your team question, early on, you want people who are, hungry for a startup, for sure. You want people who can learn quickly, right? Because it's a learning game. It's not like the things you build is almost like a way to learn something. And so the faster you can learn, the better. And you want people who want to learn, who want to do this, and who are not, like, you don't want specialists. You want ideally people, unless you know exactly what you're doing. Like you want people who are generalists, who are interested in doing everything and who can jump from one thing to another and figure out what needs to be done. In our case, we needed systems engineers. So our network from competitive programming was in systems engineers who we brought in, who were able to be kind of, versatile enough to build like different parts of stack, figure out, consensuses, figure out runtimes, should we do this? Like we all switched to a new language. Like none of us wrote in Rust before we started this. And we all agreed that writing in C++ is a bad idea. So but it's just like kind of showing the learning kind of culture, right? And then as we got to something that's like working, and this gets actually to one of my mistakes. So we had this like working environment with WebAssembly, with all the APIs, so you can write smart contracts, you can write applications on it. And our sharding stuff was still being worked out, right? It was still and I actually plugged in all that to Tendermint, which is a Cosmos consensus at the time, and it worked. And I was like, I think we should launch this. And then I went to investors and asked them, and they're like, well, you promised us sharding, right? You should launch sharding. And so we should have launched that. So be very like listen to investors, but then make sure that like they have their own biases, right? And so make sure you kind of listen to a wider range of folks. And as well as like, shipping earlier is always better, and you can always add the stuff that you need later.
And just on that, why is shipping earlier better?
Because again, learning speed, right? Like if we shipped in
Feedback.
in April 2019, right? Even though it wasn't a sharded network, we would have had like a year and a half of more people trying to build applications on top of it than we've had, and like the tooling would have improved. We would have had more like community who are using this stuff already and so yes, we would have launched our consensus a year and a half later, but
you would have had users and learnings and
we already had all this. Yeah. And this is where, again, with layer one, like you're kind of building the ecosystem more than you're building the blockchain, right? Blockchain is the vehicle for the ecosystem building. And so the earlier, and like we struggled to build ecosystem while we didn't launch mainnet, because it's actually really hard to like coordinate people without having actually all those pieces live. And so so that would have kind of gave us, a year and a half potentially of head start.
Yeah. So the key is before you launch your mainnet, you want as many users and people kind of on the platform, using the platform, so that when mainnet launches, it's a usable platform as opposed to beforehand. And the lesson there is, how do you catalyze as many people as possible kind of on the near ecosystem? To that end, a question on like building in the open. So a lot of these projects that our teams have are highly technical infrastructure projects, but at the same time, to your point, these are like blockchain ecosystems that are decentralized by definition, and you need people to build on top of your platform. How do you think about building more in the open, where you're able to kind of build more community and get more buy-in before a launch, versus but on the flip side, people can see what you're doing and potentially copy it, versus building closed, where you're able to maintain your trade secrets, so to speak, but you're delaying kind of that community building aspect and developer management aspect, and people getting bought into your platform?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty radical here. I think you should just build an open source always wins, and people rarely copy stuff until it's very successful. And by the time you're very successful, unless you screw up, you can continue being successful. So like the reality is, like, especially if you're building something really complicated, like people copying it is probably your work. Like you just want to go and hire those people who are copying you because
right. You should have the best people on your team building, and likely if what you're building is innovative enough, they can't copy it, and if they can, then you want them. I like that.
Yeah. And again, like, because to remember here, it's not a point in time, right? That's why I'm talking about learning, because like that speed of learning is either way, like your code being open or not doesn't matter. The speed of learning is your kind of your mode as a startup, right? Because like the reality is, there's a big company that can go look at what you're doing without looking at the code and re-implement all this, if they could actually like coordinate that effectively.
Right. Okay. So that, right. And then that feedback loop that you have from the community developers becomes really valuable.
Exactly.
Cool. All right. So just to get back to this stage part. So you wanted to build DevNet for kind of that developer environment, and DevNet first, get people on board. Then kind of rush to launch as quickly as possible with that, and then a testnet, and then go to mainnet. How did you think about, like, were those primarily also the milestones for fundraising then? So you raised money to build a DevNet, you raised money to then, I just want to kind of like align there for some of the teams as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say like, think of it as aligned. I mean, in our case, we were a little bit more arrogant in the beginning. We thought we'll build everything in 6 months. But we learned that. But yeah, it was pretty much like we built DevNet. We had like, first kind of pieces of the ecosystem as well, like wallets and everything. And so we went and kind of started raising like next round with that. And then that was, yeah, roughly like testnet time. And then, yeah, like then we kind of raised into like launching the whole network and kind of bringing validators, doing all those things as kind of the stage there. So generally, yeah, I would align it with like a milestones in your development. And obviously it depends on like what you're doing. Sometimes you want to raise before the milestone and kind of almost sell the milestone as a thing that people want to, expect. And like in this way, like even if the milestone is not as big, ends up as big as you expect, at least you already raise money. Uh, but or if you do have like a pretty big milestone coming, then you can also do it on the heels of that as well. So that's where some art comes in, like timing things. It's the same, you sometimes want to raise before the end of YC, sometimes you want to raise after. Like it really depends where you are and what results you'll show.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, and then in terms of kind of the ecosystem that you're building here, you're building for developers first, then users, then validators, it seems like. And in that process, you have to like bootstrap. You need to get developers to want to build on Near. How did you think about kind of bootstrapping each of these, specifically developers? Because developers are the ones that build the applications for the users. And then once you have both of those, you get validators, etc. So curious, like how you thought about that and bootstrapping and attracting developers in the first place.
So I'll start with validators because it's easier and it is kind of detached. So with validators, we started by doing what we call like incentivized testnet, pretty much, where because it was like fully rewritten stack, right? There was a lot of interesting challenges, when we were just before rolling out, and so people needed to like try to break it, run some load tests, etc. And so kind of we were rewarding them for doing that. And we used that actually as a part of governance as well, such that we didn't actually launch a network, right? We took the validators who ran the incentivized testnet, we gave them kind of the genesis and the, how to run it. And they run it and voted in for, token to be launched, right? So was a decentralized decision of the validators and the token holders to actually like start the, in a way start the network.
Gotcha.
But that I would say like if validators and token holders like a separate almost constituencies from developers and users. And so for developers, I mean, honestly, we've tried a lot of stuff and we continue trying. It's still a learning experience. Originally, we started with something like Accelerator. We had like a beta program where we would work with kind of early stage startups. And then we had like a couple actually sitting in our office for a bit. And we were, helping. I mean, they kind of were just almost like design partners in some way, where like they were trying to build on us and like going through all the pain of tooling not working, and we fixing that for them. And I in general, like design partners is a great way to get both first users / customers and also like make sure your stuff actually works, because they'll probably find all of the issues that you will not yourself find. Then I would say we, it kind of evolved into a grants program and also some kind of ecosystem programs. We had guilds who were referring developers. We had, obviously a ton of conferences and hackathons with, fun kind of sponsored hackathons. And actually right now we have this new approach we call Dev Hub, which is almost like a developer communities who are come together. There's like different levels of communities. Some just brainstorming ideas, some are building specific things. There's like a platform where people can request work to be done, something to be built. Community can request it. Some other people can say, oh, I want to do it. Somebody else can like fund it. And so we have like this kind of like community focused like building experience. And this is all in parallel to also focusing on founders and startups and bringing them in and kind of empowering them to build successful apps on this. So like kind of focus, I would say like we stratified, what usually called developers into two groups. One is people who come in and want to learn and build cool things and maybe like innovate on technology, but not planning to build a business. And then there's people who want to build a business and start up a company, a project, or whatever. And so with them, kind of, there's a bit of a different strategy. More, we have actually Horizon, which is a platform to match founders with other contributors and backers and other projects, as well as they have education materials for startups, how to do customer discovery, how to do, some of the things we discussed, right? So like those are almost like got stratified because like the way you approach them is very different.
So a lot of activities ultimately to kind of build this developer ecosystem here. But the vision is huge, was huge and is huge. It's difficult to often solve everything for everyone at once, right? And kind of traditional, maybe we can go back to the other question before, traditional tech strategy tends to be like vertically integrate first and then expand outwards as a platform play, whether it was the iPhone that started as kind of with its own capabilities and then expanded with the App Store, whether it was Amazon that started with books and then expanded out to kind of other sellers, as well as taking their own tech platform and expanding that out. How did you think about, especially in the early days, what was going to be unique about Near and what types of applications you wanted people to build? Or did you want it to be more open in general and just kind of see what the community community wanted?
Yeah, I think we kind of were striding this idea that we did want to be open, and I think partially it wasn't also clear what are the use cases that do work in blockchain at the moment. Especially in 2020, it was like early 2020, it wasn't super clear. I think then DeFi kind of showcased and NFTs came by, but generally speaking, from my perspective, both DeFi and NFT are still part of infrastructure of the platform. They're not actually like the applications. And so at the same time, kind of our focus on ease of use has always yielded to this more consumer focus, consumer application focus. And so a lot of the more kind of, I would say like partnerships work we're doing is really partnering with consumer applications where blockchain is almost not that visible, at least in the beginning. So a really good example is Sweatcoin. They actually like a 6 or 7 year old startup that has over 120 million installs, 10 million monthly active users. And they integrated Near in such a way that, you convert your loyalty points that they had into tokens, but you don't really like, it doesn't get into your face that you're on blockchain now. And then you like discover that you can do more things with them, and you can go into other apps, and so like that's the experience that like Near is really well designed for, to really kind of attract new users who don't really know. And so Near now actually has more users than I think Ethereum Mainnet, Optimism, Arbitrum, and maybe something else combined, because of this approach. And at the same time, like for example, users of Sweatcoin can actually trade on DeFi without, again, knowing that they're doing that. They just have like a swap thing in their app, which allows them to swap, but it actually uses an off-chain order book with on-chain settlement every second, like it runs, it's a sophisticated DeFi protocol with perps and everything, but like from their perspective, they just in their walking app, can flip their loyalty points into some other tokens. And so that is like the experience we always been wanting to get to, right? Because that's kind of from open web, how do we build for billion users is like, it will not be the way to teach everyone blockchain. It will be by building apps they just use it. And so one of the things we've been focusing on lately is like kind of really doubling down on that and building kind of even more, I would say, like experience, presentation layer, and identity layer that makes it even easier to build stuff like this. And so like, kind of super app type experience, such that you can embed into any app almost like all the functionality without really like needing to rebuild it, without needing to figure out how the blockchain works. And at the same time, onboard users with just email and stuff like this. And so I would say like that's kind of, like it's not a specific vertical, right? Like we're not saying like, oh, we're gonna only do like finance or something. It's more like it's apps that are really focused on consumer who doesn't really need to know how the underlying tech works.
Right. And then that drives your features, as you mentioned, whether it's the identity layer or kind of kind of that abstraction, so to speak, that you have through your blockchain OS. It's everything does seem very much geared towards how do you target the specific needs of consumer applications to make it easy to onboard and use and integrate with decentralized applications, whether they know or care. Cool. Awesome. What did I have here? I want to quickly like touch back on the token launch that you had. So you mentioned that you left it to your validators. Like in terms of the tokenomics and kind of the tokenomics design, would love to hear kind of how you thought about that, or whether that was something that was driven more by the validators from kind of what you mentioned earlier, and yeah, what the considerations were there.
Yeah, I mean, so we were designing token economics, kind of just as part of the protocol. And I mean, mostly considerations were how do we kind of offset the validators' costs for running the network? And at the same time, how do we ensure that thing? So like kind of when you're using layer one, there's actually you're doing two things. One is there's a momentarily cost of accepting and propagating transactions and running like CPU RAM costs of running it, and there's a long-term cost of storing data on blockchain, which doesn't go anywhere. And so Ethereum actually has this problem of state growth where its state actually linearly growing, and people don't know what to do with that because it's actually not captured in the value of what validators are paid for in any way. And so the idea was to how to address all these problems. And so we designed like storage staking, which aligns kind of locking near proportionate to how much storage you're using, which also in a way redistributes the rewards back to validators proportionate to how much storage is there at the moment when they store it. Transaction fees that kind of burn on one side and then rewards are distributed on the other side. And we also designed kind of additional business model for developers where if you're building a contract that's kind of not user facing and doesn't have its own direct fee capture, part of the transaction fees also go to the smart contract. So 30% of transaction fee goes to the smart contract. And so I mean, there's like few other pieces around, how validators are rewarded based on the uptime and stuff like this. But kind of the idea was like, how do we kind of create a, circular economy model such that it can keep the transaction fees low for all the users and developers while rewarding validators for the work they're doing, not just now, but also in the future. And so that was like main considerations. And I think one of the interesting things now that we adding this identity and other layers, it actually now interesting, and we have conversations in the ecosystem, how do we expand that to add this other forms of interaction that now exist in the ecosystem?
Any big lessons learned that you had, things you might have done differently or could have done better in designing the tokenomics?
I mean, I would say tokenomics is like probably the hardest part to like there's no right answer. There's like at least in like this like protocol design, like computer science part of it, like it's a sound system, you can test it on like logical failures and it works. With economics is like, first of all, you need to launch it to see if it works. And then even then you may not know because like the market forces or whatever at the time are not like particularly operational or whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't really have like a advice there except, and like, try to think through different scenarios, see how the, like supply demand in a way works, and then try to create ways for more participants to be involved in that, because like the more participants involved, the more the economy is like functional.
Gotcha. So in that sense, kind of from a timing perspective of when you launch the token and build those incentives, if you want your participants to be involved, it sounds like you should be launching your token after you have a decent sized community already of developers, of validators, et cetera, within your ecosystem. Is that correct? Or would you say you launch it beforehand as a means of bootstrapping them, or launch it afterwards once you have them to ensure you have the right ones and the right incentive structures?
So generally, I would say launch it later after you already know how your system works without a token, because token is like, it's like a booster. If you pointed your spaceship to the wrong side, you're gonna like drive yourself into the ground. So you want to make sure you're aligned in the right direction. At the same time, for layer ones, for example, it's really hard to launch without a token. Like, and again, like layer twos, for example, now have a way to do that and kind of launch token later and reward the people who participated with airdrop. So like there's ways now to do that for different types of applications. Layer ones are actually still pretty complicated to do that, but it is figure outable if you really want to. So yeah, I would say like delay the token launch as possible to kind of build the system and point everything in the right direction, see your kind of normal, retention and growth metrics, and then use the token then on top of it as like a accelerant.
Awesome. Cool. Next, I'm going to switch tacks a little bit into partnerships. So you mentioned a little bit about design partnerships, and then kind of I know at different times you've had partnerships with Alibaba, with Google, with MasterCard. How do you think about partnerships as a go-to-market? When should you start having partnerships, and to what degree do partnerships support you? How much of that is just like credibility versus like a way to supercharge adoption versus kind of working more with developers specifically in developer communities?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's like both good and bad answer. That's you need a little bit of everything, right? You focus on one and you get a little bit of everything else. So I mean, partnerships definitely, like with bigger name brands, right? It's a credibility hacking, and it's the same as investors in many ways. You kind of getting this credibility halo from them to then hire more people, bring people into community, or partner with some other partners. Now there's some partnerships which are end up being useful and actually bring you a ton of usage, right? And you don't know which ones will be which kind of ahead of time. But there are partnerships where you are finding a way to really fill in the need for a bigger player in such a way that they actually are starting to build and rely on you. And finding those is kind of the holy grail, and that's an art of doing that. And some luck. At the same time, that's what I was mentioning, design partners. There is a sweet spot of not a startup, like if you're just working with developers or even startups, like they're small enough that they have their own problems, right? And they don't know yet what they're doing, or they're figuring out. But there's the scale ups, and scale ups are the ones who they already know what they're doing, but they're still flexible enough to try something fundamentally new, or like change part of their business model or business process to use your, in our case, our platform. And so there, at least from our perspective, is a sweet spot of kind of, it's like a partner slash working together, because they already have usage, they already know what they're doing, they have figured out some model, and now you can introduce kind of more things. And compared to Google's and Alibaba's, which are great partners to offer some services to our ecosystem, but they're definitely not going to change their business model. Like I would love to Google Cloud to run fully on Near, but probably not going to happen. Right? And so like this is kind of the way to think about it is sometimes you want to find startups because they are still looking for stuff and you can serve their needs. But like the scale ups is where you have this really sweet opportunity, because they're like big enough to be able to participate, but small enough to not be able to make decisions.
So I like that. So like the big partners are great for credibility and and kind of brand building, so to speak. The small ones are nice, but you don't necessarily know if you should take their feedback seriously. Ultimately, what you care about is how your ideal developers are going to build and the people they're going to build for. So like that mid-market segment. So in the Web2 space, we'd call them like mid-sized businesses. And you're calling them scale-ups here, where they're actually like a target developer that you would want. And they're able to adjust you and vice versa and give you feedback. And they're not going to be too rigid. Sweet. And I guess like on the near side specifically, like you mentioned that you're looking now at the consumer side. Like within that, do you have a focus currently with the partnerships that you have for payments, real world assets, games? Do you have any thoughts on like where do you think that growth in the next 2 to 3 years is going to come from for the next wave of users, specifically on Near, but also blockchain in general?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of, I would say, I mean, like maybe a good category is called lifestyle and like payments, loyalty, but also like kind of other related to that things are in that. Like I'm kind of, I would say like loyalty probably being the biggest one, and some form of loyalty. And even when we talk about games, it's still it's actually more loyalty than like game designers hate NFTs for game assets. Like that's just like if you talk to any game designer, they're like, this is just a ridiculous idea. But actually having a loyalty and various other ways to interact with your kind of world that doesn't affect your game mechanics and game design is like something that games are using, including on Near, using the blockchain for. And so I think that and payments are probably the biggest use cases right now. And then, I mean, we definitely are excited like about social and kind of more like linking together things that are right now locked in this walled gardens, right? And this is where, you know, with our blockchain operating system and some other stuff we're building, we're kind of like resurfacing some of this data and ownership of the kind of user's identity back. But I would say that is, again, it's interesting because it kind of opens up new business models and ways for people to participate in the economy together. And so like it's still payments and loyalty in some form or other, just kind of repackaged into a more social experience that before you wouldn't have. And I think real world assets is definitely interesting, but it's a hard space where kind of every time you have a real world asset, there's some underwriter. And so it kind of violates a lot of DeFi principles. And so now you kind of need to like figure out the complexity of that. And so I do think real world assets are coming and they're a really important part. But I think it will still be some time before this like fully matures. But generally think, I mean, again, from my more vision perspective, I think all of the traditional finance will just switch to use blockchain as a better way to kind of just run their operations. Like the cost savings of operations from using blockchain for all of the finance is insane. Like right now, every single bank redoing KYB on the same company over and over and over and over again, because they don't have a protocol to agree that this is KYB and we all, you know, like align that this KYB done on this company. And so, and KYB costs way more. Like KYC costs, you know, like some, you know, from $1 to 5, 7. KYB can cost like 10 grand because you need to like verify all the like different, you know, owners and their like relationships and all the stuff. You need to like do a bunch of additional paperwork on. So like the amount of like operational saving by just using blockchain will be immense. And again, it may not be like, so I think that one of the important things, open web doesn't mean everything is on public blockchain. There will be other components of the network. And so we have private shards for like different use cases. I also think Urbit style or Urbit itself will play an interesting role as well. So it will be like more of a network of open components that are interacting together to build some of these applications. And then, then we'll see a lot more kind of interesting stuff happening there.
So to that end, where do you see there are still gaps in the infrastructure stack in blockchain? Either as it kind of relates to Near specifically, but also broadly. I know like you're looking at blockchain operating system as being this almost cross-chain kind of front end layer. But yeah, would love to hear where you think there are still gaps that need to be resolved that our teams could potentially also tackle.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the biggest gaps that we are tackling is this multi-chain. So Boss, yeah, is like a multi-chain presentation layer, right? And kind of allows you to, you like have in one place all the applications of all the blockchains. But right now you still need to have wallets of different chains connected to this, right? And so we're solving that by having a single kind of identity, quote unquote, wallet account, which has kind of mappings on all other chains, and so you can interact with them. So, think of Coinbase, you have Coinbase account, but then it has addresses on all the chains. And so imagine that non-custodial, and you can interact with apps. So I think that honestly is one of the biggest gaps right now. So we're trying to solve that. But I think when I saw that there's some questions about AI and Web3, one of the interesting gaps is the kind of decentralized private inference. So right now, for AI models, right now, you either have an open source model, which has no business model, and like everybody just runs it on their whatever local machine, or you have a API for some gated model, right, that you don't even know what runs there. They switched it yesterday, whatever. Who knows what's going on? Quality degraded. Nobody knows, right? And so having a provable, like private models, which ideally have a business model as well, will allow to actually create a new market of people building good models. But then everybody can rely and use them, and you can use them on chain or off chain, and you can use them for your private use cases, and this data doesn't leak to some third party. So I think that is honestly probably the biggest infrastructure missing piece right now. And given the hype, something to be done. And if you guys are interested, let me know, because I've been thinking about how to do this. Otherwise, honestly, like a lot of the infrastructure is there. And now, yeah, there's like gaps here and there. Like we did push notifications, for example. Is that a complicated thing? Like, yes, it gets actually really complicated as you like want to build it for everyone. But this is something that like everybody needs, right? So there's like small slices of experiences that are missing like this, right? Push notifications, search across like multiple chains and stuff like this. But I would say beyond that, it's time to build like actual consumer apps. I think we're there. Like we have consumer apps being built. Like users are now can onboard with email. They don't need to know about crypto. You have, gasless transactions on Near and as well coming to, EVMs. So you can start doing stuff that is like actually like consumer grade really easily. And I think now it's time to like really focus on that.
Right. So the user experience, the responsiveness, the cost, you think is at a place that blockchain is actually viable as opposed to the promise that we had in 16, 17 that everyone was raising for.
Pretty much, yeah. Now it's time to build a decentralized Uber. Is well, this is a good example of incentives, right? Like, let's say you build an Uber, decentralized Uber, and you can launch a token, and maybe you will get it right, or you can at least get some first drivers and users going, make sure it works right, and then launch a token to incentivize more of them joining, right?
I think the marketplaces in general and decentralized marketplaces have been the ideal world for a while. It's just building that UX and having the right people in industry do it has been a challenge. But
one more infrastructure ask is on ramps and off ramps. Right now, it's still really like, let's say you build a decentralized Uber. What you want is to enter a credit card, right? And pay for stuff, and then person receives stablecoin or receives as well fiat. And like just that part, I mean, part of it is regulatory stuff. Part of it is just integrations with like proper on ramps. Part of it is negotiating with like MasterCards and Visas. like that is like a really, really hard company that so far have nobody built.
Okay, last question. Kind of, you've had a long journey here. There are very few people that have obviously built blockchain without challenges and issues. What do you think are some of the missteps that you made that you would have done differently in kind of build and go to market, or advice that you would give to the founders as they build their projects?
Yeah, I think, well, one, as I said, ship earlier, figure out how to launch without the token, add token later. I would say we also like went full decentralization route very early, which I would not recommend. Like make your processes work first, then decentralize. Yeah, I think, keep talking with your customers, with your users, with your developers, understand where their pain is, and kind of prioritize that over next feature.
Gotcha. Okay, and at what point do you think you need to start having obviously this is a technical platform. You had a ton of like super strong technical engineers that were working with you. At what point do you think you need to bring in people that will be talking to customers and kind of are more on the business strategy side, the soft skills? Is that something that's later on once everything is built? Is it like as early as possible so that you're able to take that into account as you're building it out?
Yeah, so we had a person like this, Sasha, from day one when we switched to blockchain. And it was very helpful because in 2019, I think we talked with like 300 startups in Web3, which probably was all the startups in Web3 at the time. And so we had like a very clear understanding what doesn't work, what are the problems, what are the journeys, etc. I think yeah, I mean, as a founder, you obviously need to be doing those, but if you have resources to have someone help you kind of just coordinate that, get warm introductions, get the meeting set up, process all that feedback, etc., it's definitely helpful because I mean you'll have a lot of jobs, right, to do that, to on top of that. So like, and you need to do that. You need to talk with customers as much as possible.
Awesome. Let's see if we have any questions in the chat that we could potentially answer. So I think we touched on a lot of Michael's questions here. Maybe, I guess, any last comments on like things that had a massive impact on ecosystem growth?
Well, I think, I mean, at different stages, different things had that impact, right? I think I would say there's a combination of, in our case, we had, grants, grants kind of system launched in 21, which end up kind of supercharging at the time. We had a kind of like Aurora at the time that launched to power kind of bringing EVM developers, who maybe didn't want to rebuild in Wasm in Rust. And then, launching up like the scale up bigger applications with millions of users to be launched on Near, and partnering and figuring out how to like kind of co-design with them to be successful, right? They brought a lot of users, and then through that, then these users starting to explore the ecosystem. So I think like at different stages, you kind of need different things. And I think we, as the ecosystem, we still need more of these things because there's still plenty to do.
Cool. I mean, with that, we're just about at time. It has been awesome. Any last words of advice you have to founders that are building in the bear market here?
I mean, keep building. We started, as I said, August 2018. I think I remember waking up in the morning, looking at the Ethereum price went to $80. I'm like, well, I'm not going to raise money today. And then Naval, gave us the first check. So I think the same day. So at the end, it's like the market, is up and down. The reality is, if you believe in what you're doing, if you have a good team, you're connecting with the right people, you're building the right thing, you get funded from that, you start, building on top of that with, bringing more interesting things to market. Like, bear market is actually quieter, there's less distractions, and so you can really focus on getting that value out of the door.
Awesome. Cool. Illia, thanks again. I know it's late for you. So appreciate the time, and wishing you a good night, and everyone else, thanks for joining.
All right, thank you. And yeah, connect to Cameron, as he's in Bay Area, so he can route you through the ecosystem. Cameron's amazing. All right, thank you, Gil. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.